Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. I know it's late. My name is DeLeon Addison, and I am an associate professor of nursing here at TCC. Today's breakout session will talk about active learning activities, and we will also talk about the student perspective. I have 4 of my former students who are at varying levels in our nursing program that will be joining me today. Please be kind and thank them for being willing to be a part of the presentation today, as they are taking time out of their day to join us. So for housekeeping, please mute your microphones unless you're asking a question. This session is being recorded and will be archived on the Connections Week webpage for later viewing. In addition, there is supposed to be a sign language interpreter for our session who will be signing for any deaf participants, and they will be sharing their video. Lastly, at the end, after we have questions, I will post a survey link, and please complete this so that you can get your professional development points and to let us know how you felt about the session. Otherwise, sit back and enjoy. So we are going to start by doing an activity. And my question to you is, how do you think that I used this activity? Evidently, we're going to start by having technical difficulties. I'm so sorry, my Microsoft totally went off. And such is the life that we live right now with technology every day. I got on here early and checked all this out, and of course when I needed to work the budget. So this is the screen that the students would see. They would click join with their Google account. It's just spinning for me. I'm so sorry. Okay, so the students, I just went into it a different way, but the students would normally get a link. And I will take them to here where they would pick their class. And then there's a discussion topic for that week. Usually those discussion topics will have a video or they'll have a question prompt that I have left for them. They would then respond to that. So any ideas how I use this in my class? It's a question. Anybody want to try? Any thoughts as to how we use this?
It's just a means of getting students engaged, getting them to do something, participate.
Yeah, so I actually use this particular function of Flipgrid as a sneak peek for our discussions each week. So the students would have to come in to the Flipgrid and they would start their day using this. And in a second, you'll see my PowerPoint come back up and you'll see some of the topics that I shared with them over the summer. So they would come in, they would do this, and then they would also be able to discuss with their peers. This was actually one of the favorite activities that they did this semester when I asked the students and that I got back feedback in my evaluations. However, how I was going to start my presentation was just to show you that. I really enjoy doing active learning in my classroom, but about 3 years ago, I had incorporated a lot of active learning activities into a summer course that I was teaching, and I got a lot of negative feedback from my students, and it actually was quite concerning to me, and I went and spoke to my assistant dean about it because I was heartbroken because I thought I was doing something that really was engaging to my students. So I went back to the drawing board. I actually attended our Active Learning Academy, as well as did several webinars, conferences, and my homework. And I encourage all of you to do that as well. But this is what I learned. First of all, we can think outside the box, but we also can think inside the box. The most important part, however, is that we make the connection for the students. We have to be thoughtful and intentional in the engagement activities that we use and make sure they understand why we're using them. So I showed you that activity on the Flipgrid. The students get to do that every day before class, but I also bring it into class. So whatever the topic was that they talked about will also be discussed in class. And I bring in various points from that into our discussion. And they can talk about their reaction to the video or how it got their minds working and prepared for class and bringing in the material that they read for class for that day. Also, there's no perfect solution. So it's always going to be a trial and error. You may try an activity and figure out, oh, it works this way, or maybe it doesn't. So for example, this past semester before we had COVID, to teach cardiac to my class and how the heart pumps, we did some racing in my classroom with water buckets. Well, we shouldn't do that in the hallway because it could be a hazard and someone could fall. It worked okay with the carpet, but it was best to do it outside in the grass. But the students really enjoyed it. So don't be too hard on yourselves as you start trying out some of these activities. So after I did all that homework, I went back to the drawing board, like I said, and I started trying some other things. So I'm going to show you some of the things that I've tried in my classroom. So first of all, I've done debates. The students spent 3 weeks learning about, first we went over the nursing code of ethics. Then they had some personal homework to do, reading in the book and doing a survey that was only for them. They didn't share it. It was going over different ethical situations that they may encounter in nursing. The third week, I gave them everyday situations. Oh, and I'm sorry, in the second week, we also went over the rules for the debate, and they were told who their teams were going to be. And then in the third week, we actually had the debate, and they did not know previously what their topics were going to be, but it was everyday topics. It wasn't hard things like euthanasia or things that could go to court. It was everyday things that a lot of times students don't think are ethical issues. For example, a spouse coming in and having a STD or a terminal illness and not being able to tell the other spouse. How do you handle that situation if it involves them? And so the students really enjoyed that. And any class, no matter what your discipline is, you could have debate topics. For example, in sociology, criminal justice, maybe you talk about who your favorite sociologist is and why, and the students have to go back and forth as to why those theorists have the best theory and how they would apply it. The next one that I did, and I did this in clinical, I call it a round robin concept map. Our students work on care planning, and it's something that usually starts off kind of hard for them, but it gets easier. And this particular concept activity, they really enjoyed, because at the beginning, it's really hard for them, but then towards the end of the semester, they can see how they've grown. So in this activity, all the students are given a concept map. And in nursing, we get report on our patients. And so one student out of the class gives report on their patient for the day's activity. So we usually have anywhere from 9 to 10 students in our groups, and I break them into groups of 3 and one group of 4. So we'll go 3 rounds for the concept mapping. So each student has a blank concept map, and I try to get them to have different color pens within their group, their small group. So the one student who was supposed to give report that day will give report, and the students take notes on a separate piece of paper, on a clean piece of paper. They'll take notes from what we call a S-bar on their patient. Then I give them 3 minutes to fill in as much of the concept map as they can. And I put a timer on that they can hear the timer. When the timer goes off, they have to stop. They're not allowed to talk during this time. It's called silent discussion, is actually what this activity is called. Then they have to pass their paper clockwise. And then we go for 2 minutes. And that next student has to continue filling in the concept map for the next 2 minutes. And then we do one more round, because we go 3 rounds. For another 2 minutes, and then they get their paper back, and then we have a discussion and we talk about what's on their papers, what could they have added, what questions they may needed to have asked more information about, and they enjoy talking this out. So the reason that this gets harder, it gets easier for them because they understand more in their thinking, because they have to use critical thinking, but it gets harder because as we go in through the semester, the easy answers go really quickly. So by the time you get the second and third round, they're really having to think in order to fill in the concept map, because those first little things they fill out really quickly. So it's a good activity to make them think for critical thinking, but also so that they can see their growth long term. And one way you could do this, like I was thinking in another class, like in English class, maybe there's different types of poems. You could do this and have the students write a different line of the poem as they pass the map around. That would be a cool way to do this. or maybe in history, doing a history timeline, each student have to add to the timeline if we were going to add that to a different class. This was just a fun one. Last year, I was able to apply with some of my peers. We applied for to student activities and apply for a field trip to take our students to see a mock trial. And they got to learn about the legal aspects of nursing and things like that. And so that field trip option is open to all of us as faculty, no matter our discipline. You just have to write a proposal and turn it in to student activities, and they will let you know whether or not it is approved and if they can cover those funds. And so it was a nice way to take the students outside of the classroom that were able to attend, and then bring it back into the classroom and make it applicable to what we were doing. And our department dean was on board with this and actually helped pay for this as well, because it was kind of expensive. And so you just have to be aware of the cost for those things, but we are able to do that, and that was a fun activity that the students enjoyed. The next activity that I do in my classroom that the students enjoyed is sensory lab. I do not lecture on this particular chapter in the book. I set up my classroom in stations for the day, and the students have to go through the stations, and they experience deficits as much as I can try to have them experience deficits of sensory. And then they have to sit down and talk about how they can plan to take care of a patient who has these deficits. So you see in this picture, the student has on the headphones. She was having to experience the deficit of hearing, and the student that's talking to her is trying to get her to give her a menu order at a restaurant. And then to that sensory lab, we actually add mobility. So you see the students trying out the walker, and then we do sense, and then they're doing the eye chart over here. And so this one is kind of more specific to whatever your discipline is, but you could set up stations to try out something different. It works very well for science, but I'm sure there are other things and other disciplines that you could maybe do stations with and have the students just experience learning in a different way. And then that was some more students doing the same one. The next thing that I did is I collaborated with some of my peers in other disciplines. So myself and Chris Blevins, for the last 3 semesters, have co-collaborated with our chapter on surgery. So we teach the nurses what they need to do on their side, and she teaches her surgical techs what they need to do on their side, and we take them into the surgical suite together, and basically we mirror for them what has to happen in that relationship, and then we give them an opportunity to do it as well. And the students generally really enjoy this. They get to put into practice some of the things that they've already seen and heard, because we do it after we've lectured. And then, like I said, Chris and I demo for them, and then we also allow them to practice as well. This was a simulation that I did with a peer from actually a different school, where in nursing and mental health, students have to, or not students, patients come into the hospital, and they have to have their belongings checked. And so at their school, they actually have the suitcases in the labs, and the students can see them and go through them, but she took pictures, and my students were able to look at the pictures and do the same activity. And we actually did this activity virtually. And I put them in groups, and then we came back and talked about it in groups. So the last thing, and the students that are going to be with us this afternoon for the rest of our presentation will tell you this was their favorite from this semester, is I brought SLS, which is one of the programs that we have, to life. So I made animations for my students so that we could make case studies seem real to them. So I'm not going to show you all of it, but I am going to show you a little bit of it and how I incorporated critical thinking. So you hear me talking, I give the students an S bar. They're then, after the S bar, they're able to ask me questions. So then the students are given 20 minutes and they go through a chart. And you see the stop sign in the animation. And these stop signs are throughout the animation, and this is where the critical thinking comes in. So there's a chart that the students go in and look, and they have to review the patient chart. They have to look at all these sections, and then we come back and talk about it as a group. And they're able to ask questions. We discuss what they found in the chart and how they can use that information to take care of their patient. Then they're shown a little bit more.
Professor Addison, sorry to interrupt. I've got a couple people in the chat, someone saying that they're not able to hear you, and is there visual? I only have audio. On my screen, I'm able to see and hear you, but there's a few others that are not.
So you'll see they're given information about the diagnosis.
We're not able to hear your animation if it's talking.
Oh, you can't hear it. So sorry. Can you hear me talking?
Yes, we can hear you, just not the animation.
I'll turn it up. Okay, so the students would get to see this. There will be another pause in the video, and they'll be asked, what do they want to do next? So there are stop points throughout the rest of this. I'm not going to show you the rest of the video because it's kind of long, but they have to think it through, and they have to tell me what they want to do. We discuss SBAR. They practice giving SBAR to the doctor. If there's medications that they're going to give, then the students also have to look up the meds and tell me what patient teaching they would do, talk to me about what interactions they would be concerned about. And then at the end, when we're done, they actually do some type of care plan. And every week, how they did it, whether it was a concept map, we did them by drawing pictures, like they had to literally draw a picture of a patient or some way of visual drawing to show me their care plan for the patient. And so they told me this was their favorite activity this year. So what I decided to do was to talk to some students about engagement. And so I have 4 students that will be joining me today. They are Tiffany Greer. She is a first-year nursing student. She actually has had the opportunity to have me twice. She had me when we were on campus for her first semester in theory class. So she actually had me in the classroom for a whole semester and got to see what I did in the classroom. But then she also had me online this summer for virtual class for the entire summer for mental health. And Tiffany is a student who does not have kids. And in a minute, you'll see why that is relevant. Bala is supposed to be joining us. He's at work and I haven't seen him pop up. So hopefully he'll get to join us. Bala is one of our second-year nursing students.
I'm here.
Oh, hi, Bala.
Hi, sorry. I did not want to interrupt you, sorry.
Bala is an ESL student. He has children and he works. He had me for mental health and totally virtual. But he, however, has had classes both in person and virtually. Amanda Thompson is my next student. She has only had me virtually. She had me for mental health. She is a mom and she works as well. So she will be joining us. And then the last student that will be joining us in our panel is Gerald Solis. And Gerald Solis is also a student who does not have kids. And he has had me both online and offline. The importance of why I'm telling you these details of these students is because I wanted to have a diverse panel when the students were answering the questions and talking to you. We have students that have kids. We have students that don't have kids. We have students that work. We have students that don't work. We have students that have language, ESL, English as a second language. So maybe it takes them a little bit longer to study or things like that. And so visual learning becomes a better way for them or an asset when we're using those techniques in class. So I wanted to give you a very good variety when I'm talking to the students. So please welcome all 4 students. I'm gonna stop sharing my PowerPoint and hopefully we'll be able to see them when they're talking. So the first question that I'm gonna ask the student is, what activities or methods have you found for yourself to be most engaging in class? And what did you take away from those activities?
Does it matter who talks?
Either of you all can answer. Go ahead.
Okay. I guess I'll go first. So a couple of things that were most engaging for me. Of course, you mentioned the SLS, which was the simulation where we could go in and read a patient's chart. And I liked it because it taught us exactly what we needed to look for. And then it was very engaging because, we would have to fill everything out ourselves. So we'd have like our own patient chart, go in, find everything ourselves, and then we would hop back on, collaborate, and you would tell us, okay, well, what did you find? And within that 20 minutes, because I knew that you're going to be asking us exactly what we found, I was making sure that I was very thorough. But over time, it became something that was really, really fun. And I was finding little things that you didn't even tell us about. So that helped me quite a bit to be really engaged in class. Another thing that I thought of, it wasn't something that you've done before. Not really, but in another class, I was taking molecular biology and our professor had popsicle sticks in a jar, and she would pull those popsicle sticks out and she would just ask questions throughout the class. And I really felt like everybody paid great attention in her class because of that, because you could be caught on literally at any second. And but it kept me engaged. So I'd have to say those 2 things is what really kept me engaged in classes before.
The SLS activity, as she mentioned, it for me, I enjoyed it a lot because it was as close as we can get to like real world application of what we were doing in that moment while in the confines of our own home, right? I'm getting to look through a chart, which is what I would do in an actual, clinical setting. So that activity which allowed us to kind of like get your hands dirty type thing of being able to go in and actively look through a chart, engaged us a lot. And I felt like for me, that was that rewarding feeling. And then having Professor Addison before, she actually does, she does the popsicle stick stuff to allow you to, kind of be caught off guard. And I think that that's something that's key in this time to where everyone's staring at a screen. It is keeping everyone kind of like on their toes to be able to be asked questions upon anything at any time, rather than just letting people kind of just space out and just let words be words.
Thank you, Gerald. Bala or Amanda?
Again, I'll third the SLS. That was really nice. It was a way to do your critical thinking without any worry of either embarrassing yourself in front of the nurse that you're shadowing on the floor or seriously injuring a patient. So it was really nice that we were able to see what a chart would look like and be able to collaborate with our students, our peers, and be able to ask questions in the moment. And so that was really nice. I also enjoyed the Flipgrid. Discussion boards, they can get kind of, not boring, but you do your 250 words minimum because you have to meet that. So it was nice that I can log on real quick to your Flipgrid question, answer without worrying if I got it wrong or if I was going to be judged for my answer. It was for 0 points. It was just a way that I could relax and actually participate without that worry of a grade or meeting a word minimum.
Bala, looks like you're last up for this one. I can't hear you, Bala, you're muted.
You hear me now?
Yes.
So I said, like Amanda said, so I enjoy the SLS simulation and the Flipgrid. So the SLS, we were sure that at each clinical day we were meeting the objective. So the good thing is that for the online clinical is the SLMS, the simulation and the Flipgrid. It was helping us to find out, to understand each process disease and to know how to implement the nursing process. So I was more confident when we do the SLS because we were able to go to each step on the nursing process. Like, we were able to do the concept map. We were able to go ahead into the documentation, find out what's going on, and be able to see what are the doctor orders, what are the results. And the good thing is that is to know where to go to find the things we need, the nursing clue that we need in order to implement a good care plan for the patient. So, and I want to also talk about the Flipgrid. So, before each clinical day, we were able to talk about one term, one idea, like schizophrenia, and everybody were able. It's like a class discussion. But the good thing is that we were able to do it on video. So we were able to talk, in front of the camera, talk about our feeling and what we think that we're gonna do and what we think about any specific idea. So overall it was a good, to me, really I was not expecting that it's gonna be as good like this, because I used to say that I'm gonna say that the good thing with COVID is that we were able to find out a good way, and I feel like it's the better because I'm working on the nursing field. So I most likely when I go to the clinical, I used to say to myself, okay, I know already all this. But this kind of clinical with the SLS is, is a different way for me, and seriously, I enjoy it, and it helped me to learn a lot, and it helped me to be more professional. Okay, that's it. So I know that it's not easy for you, but I want you to know that we appreciate all you do for us too. Thank you.
Thank you, Bala. So all of the activities, pretty much, there were a couple that I chose myself to talk to you all about today, but the students, we all met and they told me which ones were their favorites. So that's why they all talked about the flip grid and SLS. But I actually want to ask one particular person. I can't remember. There might be one other person too. But you all had mentioned the sensory lab. Can you talk about the sensory lab and what you got out of that? I know Tiffany was in it, and I shared your picture today while you were doing that. But I can't remember who else. Amanda, you got to do it with Professor Kreider, right? Or no? Yeah, because Professor Kreider and I both did it.
Yeah.
So can you guys talk a little bit about that and how you were able to apply it then in clinical? Because you guys were actually they were actually going to clinical at the time that we did that.
I will say, honestly, because of the whole COVID thing, I didn't get to go to clinical as much as other people did. But I will say that I was able to use it in my work, because I do work with, we say clients at my job, and we do have people, I do see hundreds of people with deficits, with sensory deficits, whether it's hearing or even language or mobility, things like that. So I did find it really awesome that we were able to kind of put ourselves in their shoes to see exactly what they were feeling. And it has helped me be able to empathize a lot more with my clients, and in the future with my patients, if I did see them in clinical or if I did see them on a professional job, I feel like I have a bigger or a better understanding, I should say, of what they're going through, or, of how they're feeling. Because I think sometimes we definitely take our five senses for granted. And so it was pretty cool to see exactly how other people were experiencing life. So that's what I took from it. And it was, I feel like it didn't help me as much as far as on the test, because it's more, pen and paper type of thing. But I feel like I gained something that I can use in my actual practice, which was really awesome.
Amanda, do you have anything you want to add to it?
Gosh, I had to think back, because I had Professor Kreider in my foundation, so forever, that feels like forever ago. But I love the activity because, like Tiffany said, it made you think about something that you take for granted. And although I didn't really get to use it so much in the clinical setting, I am a tech on a med-surg floor, so I was able to at least apply those ideas and what we got from that lab sensory project to my everyday job. So that was really, really nice. And I still use those today when I'm interacting with my patients. So I still think overall, even though I couldn't use it in clinical, that it was still beneficial in all aspects of the end game.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so the next questions, they won't all answer, but we do have some additional questions, and whoever can jump in like we discussed. So my next question for you as students is, what forms of communication engage you most as a student, and why?
Are you talking mainly by just having a professor respond to us, or communication through the classroom time?
Either or. We talked about both.
For me, like you had mentioned, I am a single parent to two smallish kids, and I do work full time. So I check my email constantly, and I make it a habit to clear my inbox every day. So for me, having a professor send out an email instead of, sometimes Blackboard announcement doesn't get sent through an email, so I may miss something that way. So when they do go that extra step and say, hey, I know I sent this through Blackboard announcement, but just in case you have such and such due tomorrow, or hey, there's a heads up, we're gonna be doing this at clinical, email for me is my preferred way of interacting with my teachers. It's basically as close to real time as I can get it off of school hours.
Thank you, Amanda. Did anybody else want to add to that, or are we going to move on to the next question?
So if we're speaking of communication, she was referring to emails, in terms of communications from a classroom setting or a class setting. I feel like there needs to be more of a back and forth, more of a conversation type communication where questions are being asked to us as the students. So it does cause us, or it does allow us to engage or reiterate or, assure certain points or stuff like that. And I feel that could be something that could be implemented a little bit more, because it's really quick to throw that away when you're in a video setting and you're just more of like, well, I've got to speak, the student has to listen, we're going to get through this, and then, hey, questions at the end. I think there should be a lot more communication and questions throughout the entire teaching process, because when we were in a classroom setting, there was a lot of that. There was a lot of open discussion, and I think that's how a lot of people learn better, by speaking, and instead of just having somebody listen. But sometimes students feel like they're not allowed to speak during video lectures, or that they're going to cause an inconvenience for somebody else or the professor. So I think that's something that needs to be done, or that should be done or could be done within a class setting in terms of communication.
So as we were discussing this in our pre-preparation, the students, we talked about with the email, making sure that the students, number one, at the beginning, understand that faculty do have 48 hours to respond, and then that we should respond, because some of the students didn't know that we have 48 hours to respond to emails, and some of us reply a lot quicker and they get used to that. And so making sure that we're checking our emails and that we're responding within that 48 hours. And then one of the other things that we discussed as far as in-class conversation was maybe doing polling. And some polling options that are out there are Kahoots, there's Minimeter, there is, you can do some polling within Collaborate. It just takes a little bit longer. We did try that in class with a smaller survey this semester, and the students did like that. But there are options out there to do that, and you can do it in Teams as well. So thank you, students, for responding to that. We also talked about resources. What resources did you all feel were important to engage students? And to give you all a clue, so you remember what we talked about workshops and some of the things that we have in the nursing department and other places throughout campus that maybe you didn't know about or you didn't feel you had access to.
I would say any type of small groups that are available, because I know there was maybe one or two topics that I just wasn't grasping for whatever reason it was, and I was able to go to a professor or go to the Student Success Center, there we go, and they were able to sit us down in smaller groups and kind of explain that then. For me, I'm not afraid at all to ask questions in class. You definitely know that. I love to have a dialogue with my professor, but some people, I feel like, they are not comfortable speaking up in class. And of course, it's something they have to work on. But however, I do think it's very important to have those small breakout sessions, because it really does help. I know it did for me for those few subjects that I needed just a little bit more work on.
Anybody else want to add to that?
Think tanks were probably my favorite thing that I miss about us not being on campus. And I know we've had a couple of that kind of trickled in here and there during our spring semester when we were still in pre-COVID, not sure what we're going to do. And I miss those. So if there was a way that we can bring those back, that would be wonderful. Again, since I work, I'm not able to always join them. So if there was a way that they could record those and then post them up in our student section, that would be great. That way we can always go back and review them, because like Tiffany said, sometimes it's just one or two concepts you're not able to grasp, and so maybe that could be another avenue for the rest of us who may not be able to meet in that Friday from 12 to 1. And so I really missed having those were wonderful to have.
So thank you, Amanda. I'm having a little bit of a connection issue. So you went out, you're talking about the think tanks, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I just wanted to make sure in case else was having connection issues as well. She said she missed doing the think tanks, and the Success Center did offer those. Bala or Gerald, did you all want to add to this question, or?
I also was a big fan of the think tanks. Again, for me, everything is just about real application.
Okay, so you like the think tanks and the small groups, Bala?
Yes, if we just can record it so you can be able to see it, because like Amanda said, I have kids, I'm working full time, so I'm not available always to go to the think tank, and so if you don't mind, we do need to have it recorded so we can able to see it after if we are not available.
So thank you all. We also discussed in our pre-discussion, they talked about the Writing Center and not always having access to that, as well as some of the things on main campus that they might take advantage of, like the librarian or things like that, or just not knowing how to access it virtually. And so I did show them where they could find it, but it might have been more helpful to them if I had done that at the beginning of the course, once we went virtual, because there were some things that they asked me about that I was like, oh, this is how you find it, or this is how you do it, and we weren't aware of how to do that. So I think one of the biggest things that came out of our conversation and engaging students was helping them navigate where to find resources, and then giving them opportunities to critically think. One last thing in regards to communication that we're going to talk about, and that is how do faculty encourage students to read before class and take advantage of faculty office hours?
Well, for the reading before class, I know I would get a lot of hate for this if I said this in front of the rest of my cohort, but I love the quizzes before class. So this semester we had to, on the first day of class, we actually had a quiz for theory meaning that you had to read before. So we took our quiz and then we met our professor on the first day. And then for the next 9 weeks, that's exactly what we did. We would have to read before class, study before class, do EAQs, which is your adaptive quizzing that helps you kind of make sure that you're progressing in the chapter. But we had to do all of that studying and then take the quiz, and then we had our midterm, and then we had our final. But I liked it because I'm very organized, and I feel like it just kept me organized. It kept me accountable. If I didn't read, then I'm not going to do well in my quiz. But I want to do well in my quiz, so that means that I need to read. And I just felt like it was very effective. And whenever I did it like that, whenever I came to lecture, I felt it was kind of like a double-edged sword. On the good part, I was able to come to lecture with my questions ready and in hand. I was able to participate. I was able to answer questions. I always feel like the best form of learning is, through repetition. And if you're able to teach it or talk about it, then, you've mastered that. And then on the flip side of that, why I find it negative is because I felt like I studied so much before class that lecture didn't help me anymore, as far as just sitting there, just going through the slide. So maybe in class, I was engaged in terms of I'm able to, answer questions or ask my questions that I had for my reading. However, I didn't gain any additional information. I didn't gain as much information as I did just from sitting there reading and doing my own practice questions. So I highly recommend doing the quizzes for class. It'll keep your students accountable. It'll keep them organized. And then again, I would never say this in front of the rest of my cohort, but you'll definitely be able to tell and weed out the students who are paying attention and who definitely are trying. I mean, aside from, their outside lives, if you have kids and working and stuff like that, but you could still really tell a big difference for sure.
Agreed. If I knew that my theory instructor was going to spend, say, half of the class lecturing, kind of doing a synopsis of what we were supposed to have read in the week prior, and then spent the rest of that 90 minutes quizzing us, doing Kahoots, doing something where I couldn't just walk away from my computer screen, like Tiffany said, it wouldn't have felt like I kind of like that double-edged sword, that I was so prepared that I was end up kind of bored in theory because I already knew what was being discussed. I wasn't engaged. And so if the theory instructors, like she said, God, I hope this doesn't get out, but if they were to tell us that they were going to basically pull popsicle sticks and call out our names and answer questions on what we were supposed to have read, I think theory would have been a lot more engaging, and I think I would have gotten more stuff out of it, for sure. I agree with you, Tiffany, but that stays between us.
So I'm gonna add that, yeah, I do agree with you guys, but the only one that I really want us guys to think about is that the grading, the quizzes grading. At least you must allow us to drop the lowest one, because at the beginning of the quizzes we really don't understand how you're asking the question. We do it. I like that because it's helping me to not procrastinate. But it took me, like the last one, it took me maybe I really start to understand the ways they are doing the quizzes on the third quiz. So I lost, let's say I lost a lot of points between the one and the second quiz. So if you wanna just help us, to drop the lowest grade, it's gonna be helpful too. So, but I do agree with you for sure. If you do quizzes before the test, it's gonna help. It's gonna help us to read and to understand the material before class. Okay.
Gerald, thank you, Bella. Gerald, did you have anything to add?
I agree. I think, and someone, I believe, here in the chat posted that they wish that their language students could prepare, and maybe perhaps it's the field that we're studying, right? We understand the severity or the importance of the knowledge that we're supposed to have with this career field that we're going into. Nursing, it's literally someone's life in our hands. So am I going to approach it the same way if I was in an English class? I don't know, because I understand the difference there. But I wouldn't go as far as saying I loved the quizzes like Tiffany, but I understood their purpose. I understood what it was doing. But then, like Amanda said, if I'm going to spend the hours of the week to study and make my notes and go through this week's assignments, I sure hope that I'm not going to now spend 3 hours watching someone read to me the same material. So that's where theory lost me this semester, because like she mentioned it, Amanda mentioned it, about walking away from the computer. I'm not going to lie, it served me no purpose to sit there and watch somebody read something I already read. So there was a different way to where we can kind of quickly go through it, and then it's like, okay, now it's an open discussion, or now let's apply this knowledge. What would you do in this scenario? What would you do in that scenario? That's a different kind of class. And I think we need to address it that way, because we're implying that every student in that lecture read the material beforehand. So now we should be asked to apply that material.
Thank you all for your answers to that question. So the students, I appreciate your honesty and your openness with answering all the questions. We had a conversation before this to all the instructors about them, because they were a little hesitant about talking about some of the things that they discussed today, because they didn't want to hurt any instructors' feelings. And so we also had discussion around, I have 4 students before you that are really good students. They prepare for class, they always participate, they have good grades. And so what I talked to them about was, well, I know you read for class, but what about the third of class that doesn't read? And now I want to do an active learning activity, and they don't know how to apply it because they haven't read. And all of you as instructors, I know, have been faced with that. And we all are faced with, well, how much lecture do we do? How much active learning? Because obviously there's material that we do need to cover. And so how do we do that? And so one thing that I did with them this semester, because all of them had me over the summer, is every class, and it was a little bit easier because I didn't teach them theory, but I taught them clinical, and they had clinical before theory this semester. So I had to introduce them to the topic in order for us to have clinical. So I went through the most important points, basically, of what they needed to know for every topic at the beginning of clinical. We spent the first hour or so going over, what do I need to know for this topic? It was like your top 10, not literally, but what are the most important takeaways that we had to do so that they could be able to do these activities? And for those who had read, it was added information and helped solidify things. For those who hadn't read, it gave them a context to be able to do those activities. But especially now that we're online, it is imperative that we all are cognizant of the fact that we do have students that come prepared, and to have them sitting in front of us for 3 hours and we are only doing lecture, we're losing some of our students who want the application and who want us to make them think and get them involved. So we are now going to open it up to the audience for any questions that you have for either me or the panelists. You can unmute yourselves and ask if you'd like.
This is Ms. Smith. I don't have any question, but I do have a comment. I appreciate all of y'all's feedback because it's very helpful for us as instructors to understand what works and what doesn't work. And I definitely will be, I already do some of this stuff in my class, but I definitely will be trying to figure out how to implement some of the other stuff. And I want to know, I do have a question actually. How did you do, what program did you use to do the animation off of the SLS?
Ion. And I just typed it into the chat for you as well. It's free for the first month and then you have to pay for it after that. So after the first month, the first one that I did took me a long time because I'm not a computer science major. I don't do animations. But after that, it got quicker to do them after that. And then I have a kid, so I was also able to involve her because I needed different voices. So the students got a kick out of that too.
I have a question or just something to hear feedback on. This is Andrew Sturshine in the Southeast Campus. We've been doing the flip the classroom thing, even in traditional lecture test classrooms that don't have labs like a allied health program might have. But we've been doing the flip the classroom thing where, as you said, the students study on their own beforehand, then they come to the class and get the hands-on instructor guided mentoring development. There was something you said that made me think of that with regard to not just flipping the order of the learning, but the order of the assessment that we do in the education side. Because, the tradition has always been you first do the lecture and then the students do the reading and then they come back and then they do the hands-on lab. And then the culmination, the whole focus of the education industry is on what? The testing. It's always the exam. And then, so then you do the test to wrap up chapter 6. And then you throw it all away and go to chapter 7. And that's it until maybe the comprehensive final at the end of the semester. So I wonder about flipping not just the classroom, but the order of what we focus our entire structure on, where the test maybe is not the culmination. The hands-on lab, the demonstration is the culmination. So we do the learning and the lecture and the discussion, then we do the test over the theory. Then the final thing, the culmination, is that hands-on practice. Because we all know students will study the night before the test. There are always going to be students who won't even look at it until the night before the test, and then they cram it and then take the test, and then they immediately throw it away the next day. So if we have the test earlier in the unit, then they test, and they have to do that because that's their demonstrable grade. But then after that is when we actually start to do the hands-on, and you bring it all together. So like one of the people said, you know, by the time you're doing it, you actually already really know what you're doing, so you can learn more from the experience of doing it.
Yeah, thank you very much. I can't take credit for the quizzing. That was actually my peers, some of my peers who taught theory this semester. I did not. But I will tell you, if your dean wants to talk to Dr. Ume, that they did do research about doing quizzing in the beginning of class with our mental health students last summer, and they had some really good findings and research from that. And then I will also comment on what you're saying about the combination being in the activity. And any of the students on the panel, please feel free to comment on this as well. I will say this semester, something that they all discussed with me, there were some activities that we did in class that weren't, they got a grade for them eventually, but we spent weeks working on them. And the culminated project, they felt a lot better about, because they felt like they understood what was needed of them, what the point of it was, but they understood more how to do it, because we spent more time on the how and the application. And then once they actually had to do the final product for me, they felt, for as much as you can make a student not be nervous, they were a lot less nervous. And they told me they enjoyed them more. The activities, they enjoyed them more, because it wasn't so like, oh, this is just about a grade. Any other comments or thoughts or questions?
I feel like I personally think that this semester was also very successful because of how it was structured regarding the chapters. At least for me, I felt like every chapter fed into the next chapter, every unit fed into the next unit. So there was none of that, you get all that information and then you throw it away, because there was really never time to forget it. Maybe you did have a little bit of an overload, but whenever you started doing those quiz questions and those application questions, you were then able to recall that previous information that you had just learned, just the prior week. And then I also, for myself, I feel like that's where those quizzes help too, because they keep that knowledge relevant. So I just took a quiz. Now it's time for me to start studying for the next quiz next week. So it just kind of melded everything together for me. So I think the structure of the curriculum is also very, very important. And just incorporating maybe a little bit of what that prior unit had within the next unit. I also took evidence-based practice at MSU this past summer, and that's literally what the class was on. The teacher said, find the research you want to do. This is what you need to do every single week. And I was really worried because it was a 5-week course. I had a presentation at the end. And I'm like, how in the world am I going to get all of this information? Well, I looked back on my past weeks, and it was something that we had been building up on the entire class time over the last 5 weeks. So I feel like that's also really important. And that's what also made this semester really successful for me, is just being able to build up on that information, and that the professors did a really good job at adding curriculum and making it flow really well together.
Yeah, we each week we had a connection piece to the last piece as well. So one thing that Tiffany did bring out that I didn't mention, I think, is with the quizzes. The quizzes were more knowledge-based than they were application, because they were given at the beginning of class. Any other questions or comments? Any other students want to say anything as parting that you would like to say to faculty? You don't want us to forget? Okay, well then I'm gonna thank you all for joining us. Thank you, students, for being a part of this. We wish you the best in your studies, and we hope that your peers will also take advantage of the resources that you have and you've learned about. For faculty members that joined us in the chat, I have posted the survey for you to be able to take, as well as to get your professional development credit. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and everybody have a good rest of the week and a great semester.